Pawn shop workers of Reddit, what is the dumbest thing a customer has brought in thinking they were gonna strike it rich? Now is my time to shine. I'm a store manager at one of the busiest pawn shops in Northern California. And because of that, I have the high volume of customers that most don't, so that means lots of stories. One, a guy brought in a stone-painted green, claiming it was ancient gold, and that after eons it had developed a patina. I tried to explain to him that all gold is ancient gold, made in something as intense as dead star colliding, but he insisted it was gold. After about 30 minutes of discussion, he forced me to test it, and when I showed him it wasn't gold, he told me he spent $4K buying it off some guy. 2, a guy brought in a bag of used syringes and wanted to trade it for a TV. I did not oblige. 3, a guy brought in a piece of safety glass from a windshield and claimed it was a diamond, even when I assured him it wasn't. 4, someone brought in a clump of bent and slightly melted forks and spoons, claiming it was a meteorite fallen from the ISS trash dump shot into space. 5, someone brought in a costume cape, claiming it was the real invisibility cloak from Harry Potter. With further questioning, he didn't think it was a prop from the movie, but the actual magical cape. 6, as a watch guy, this is my favorite. Someone brought in a Rolex watch, claiming their father gave it to them. When I showed her that it actually said Rolflex and Skiss Made, she claimed that those were misprints and meant it was worth more because of it. After I opened the watch to show her the movement, I saw that there was no movement at all, but just a weight in the back. 7, a couple came in with an old 1990 30 inches TV, claiming that it was antique, and refused to leave the store until we gave them $800 for it. We showed them selling online for literally a couple of dollars, but they refused and said they know what they had. 8, not in line with crazy item, but a good story. A couple used to come in once a week and pawn stuff. Well, apparently, one day the wife decided she was done with him as a husband, snuck up behind him in the store, sprayed him in the face with pepper spray, stole his car keys and his wallet, ran out of the store, and stole his car. 9, someone came in with an obviously recently used dialysis machine, still had blood sprayed on it like they ripped it away while it was in use, IDK, and tried to sell it for thousands of dollars. We passed. Story 2, I didn't work at a pawn shop, but a secondhand movie, music, video game, comic, toy store in KC called Vintage Stock. Games. Everyone knows this one. People would buy a game at GameStop and come in a couple of weeks later and expect us to give them $40 cash or $55 in trade in for a $60 that tanked. Or people would try and sell us a 5-year-old Madden game and be insulted at the $25 trade and we offered for a game we knew was going to sit on our shelf. My favorite was the woman who bought 10 copies of F7 Greatest Hits and thought we would pay $100 bucks for each one. Sure, if you brought in Suikoden Takentu or Lunar, we might offer you a nice chunk of change, but if it got a Greatest Hits release, not so much. Comics and toys. Every father regretted not keeping his Action Comics 1, and every mother lamented not having the original Barbie. But in the late 80s and 90s, they started mass-producing that crap. 15-year-old comics and toys have almost no value. Death of Superman and your 100 Beanie Babies are not worth our time. Sports paraphernalia. Unless you can prove Joe Montana signed that football or George Brett signed that card, we can't take it, at least for what you are asking. The Brett Favre rookie card is neat, but why did you use it as a coaster for your coffee mug? A signed hockey stick. GDFO, this is Kansas City. We don't know what a hockey stick looks like. Movies and music. In the early to mid-2000s, when Netflix mailed you movies and Steam didn't exist, all media was physical, or downloaded off Kazaa. That didn't mean we would give you $5 for every DVD and $3 for every CD. Nobody wants to buy Yanni's Greatest Hits, and we already have 16 copies of Spider-Man 2. Garage sale moms would come in with trash bags full of random crap and expect to make a living off of it. We would sort through so much crap over the summer because a bored stay-at-home mom thought giving the grandma down the block a check for $20 bucks for every DVD at her sale would net her hundreds of dollars. The big secret, that shouldn't be a secret, is that secondhand stores are still in it to make a profit. If the Beckett Guide says your card is worth 30 bucks, we are not going to give you 30 bucks. If we can sell your crappy scratched corn CD for $5, we are going to give you $1.50 cash and $3 trade-in if we are feeling very, very generous. That Star Wars figure might be worth $500 bucks and you only want $300. But if it's going to sit in the display case for a decade, we won't buy it. We want to make money, and if there is no demand, we will lowball you enough that hopefully you leave. Since I left, I heard they went to a standard buy or trade value, but when I worked there, it was up to the manager, and the manager at the time kind of let the people who knew about the product determine the price. Yes, I massively undercut the obvious methead woman who somehow found a copy of Risk for the PS1. Yes, I would buy a bulk bag of Magic cards because I knew that if we started to price them, they would discover the few ones that are actually worth something. But 95% of the time, people that get it about what we were offering sold us crap that's still sitting in a clearance bin. Story 3, had a guy try get $100 for 2 wheat pennies and 2 buffalo nickels, 4-legged. About 5 years ago, I had a guy call the store and ask if we took GPSs. I told him we did. Then he asked the address to the store. I told him. Then he asked me how to get there. Story 4. A kid from my school had a letter signed by Abraham Lincoln. He brought it to show and tell one day, and we were all super impressed. In grade 12, he stole it from his dad and went to pawn it. He bragged about how he was going to be rich. It turns out his grandfather forged the letter and gave it to his dad as a gift. Story 5. There was a buy and sell by my house that would give you $5 for any game and sell every game for 10. I used to go in and check prices on all games. And if I would make more than 10 from GameStop, I would buy the game, go to GameStop and sell it, and then buy all the crappy games GameStop had that were less than $5 and take it back to the buy and sell to make more money. I was an addict at the time, so that was my job when I wasn't working at the restaurant. Story 6. Comic book shop employee. Every single seller has a totally mint collection and a first appearance of Superman or Batman. There have been literally hundreds of Batman Supermen. Number 1 printed over the years. Every time they reboot a series, it starts at issue number 1. The people who were polite about it, I didn't mind. The people who thought we were trying to rip them off and that their books were priceless just did my head in. Story 7. Worked at a traditional game store. Had plenty of sketchy white trash people coming in with their kids' old Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic cards thinking they're extremely valuable. Usually it was just a mismatched starter set from the early 2000s, or the like. I'm not sure what started the idea that old trading cards were going to be ridiculously valuable. But no, I won't give you money for your dark magician. The level of disappointment, and oftentimes outright anger on their part, was difficult to deal with. I began just telling trashy-looking people, who weren't store regulars, that we didn't purchase cards. Did once have a guy bring in a collection that had a gnarly-looking Black Lotus. Gave him a good deal for it. Story 8. Not a pawn shop worker, but this is still kind of a cool story, or at least I think, either way. Both the shop owner and I were happy with the events that went down. I used to frequent yard sales, buy vintage items, and then take them to the antiques shop and make a little money on the side. One day, I found this little glass figurine at a yard sale for $25. When I flipped the item over and saw the red Occupied Japan logo, I got extremely excited and bought it on the spot. I took it over the shop and sold it for $45. The shop owner wouldn't go any higher, but hey, I made $44.75 of a quick purchase, so I wasn't too worried. The figure was actually worth about $125. Either way, I made money, and that figure is still sitting in his shop for sale at $125. Story 9. Yay, I can answer this. I worked in a pawn shop in the Midwest for a year and a half. We had a very large woman bring in this bizarre-looking machine. She sets it on the counter and says, "I want $500 for it." We're just staring at the machine and then looking at her, and finally the pawnbroker goes, what is it? Homemade breast pump? Yeah, this woman made her own breast pump and thought she would get $500 for it. So weird and gross. So many people try to bring in their tattoo guns equipment. I don't know if other pawn shops take stuff like this, but any in my area is a hard pass due to bodily fluid. Gross. And some of these people get pissed when you tell them no, screaming about how they spent $6,000 on this, and how can we not take it? We had this guy who would dig through garbage cans and try to bring us stuff to sell. Not uncommon, but it was very obvious that this crap was straight up from a dumpster, and he dug it out like 10 minutes before he walked in the store. One time we had to kick him out because he was losing his mind over the fact we wouldn't give him $15 for a desk lamp that had a broken bendy neck, despite the fact the pawnbroker pulled up the exact lamp on Target's website selling for $10, not broken. This guy just did not get it and was calling us all Jeets. One of my favorites is the lady who called asking if we take books. We told her we'll consider collector item books, but before we could explain, she got all excited and hung up saying that's exactly what she had. Now, when I say collector's items, I mean like first editions or one of those special edition movie books or whatever. This lady proceeds to come and ask for help carrying in her 10, yes, that's right, 10 totes of collector books. These collector books, 10-cent romance novels that you can buy in bulk from any thrift store. The conversation was the following. Pawnbroker, ma'am, these are not collector's items. We can't give you anything for them. Lady, what do you mean? They are collector's items. They are all from the same publisher and everything. Pawnbroker, yeah, that's not what makes them collector's items. I'm sorry, we will not take these items. You could consider donating them to a thrift store. Lady, are you kidding me? Do you know how many years I've spent cherishing these? They are collector's items. I am collector and I collected these. Pawnbroker, I'm sorry, ma'am. Lady, I will not be leaving this store until I get at least $300 for my collection. We ended up having to call the police because she sat in the parking lot for 5 hours ranting and raving about us and how we're a scam. The last straw for my boss is when she opened the door and screamed at the top, her lungs like a 5-year-old, and then slammed the door. Side note, my husband was the manager of said pawn shop, and that's how we met. He loves to tell people that he got his wife at the same place he got his nice watch and TV. What an idiot. Story 10. A guy literally brought in an RPG. He was doing yard work for this old lady whose husband had passed. She gave it to him for doing some yard work, not realizing it was live and active. The guy was career military, and after the bomb squad came and disabled it, they went to her house and found a trove of similarly very illegal military-grade weapons. Story 11. I'm a pawnbroker. Somebody brought in their dead grandmother's gold tooth, plucked from her ashes, with the tooth still in it. We told her that the tooth had to be separated from the gold for us to weigh it. They desecrated their loved one's remains for less than $2. Story 12. Not a pawn shop, but GameStop. Dude rolled in with hundreds of bootleg games and a bunch of modded consoles. He couldn't fathom why I wouldn't take them. Story 13. I don't work in a pawn shop, but I bought my first guitar in one. The big defense contractor in my town laid of over 10,000 people overnight, and the contagion spread. I was looking for my first guitar, and I'm cheap. After checking the music stores, I hit up the pawn shops near work. While I'm looking, this clean-cut guy in his early 30s comes in trying to pawn his guitar, hard case, and effects. Since the shop had a bunch, they offered him crap, evidently, and he left. He was almost crying, saying he got laid off and had to pay some bills. I followed him out and asked him what he wanted for it. He said $100, and I took it. I also gave him my phone number and said he could buy it back when he got back on his feet. I never heard from him. I'm looking at it now, unplayed for months. I hope everything worked out for him. Story 14. I took an old $10 bill into a dealer to see how much it was worth. Don't recall the year, but it was old. Guy says, $10, showed me what a bill would have to be like. Spent 30 minutes in his store with him looking at old rare money. Story 15. A friend's uncle allowed us to shadow him for a day at his pawn shop. A guy walked in with a metal lockbox and said he had something worth billions. He opened the lockbox and there were wood chips in it and the smell of spray paint. He claimed they were leftovers of the cross Jesus was crucified on. He's descended from an ancient and noble line of knights who took oaths to protect the cross. He wanted $2,000 for the lockbox and wood chips. Story 16. A good friend of mine owns a pawn shop in Florida. He once bought a collectible book of state quarters for less than face value of the coins. The customer wasn't bright enough to pop the quarters out of the book and spend them. My buddy's ability to keep a straight face in those situations and make the customer feel like he's getting a deal provides me endless entertainment. Story 17. I worked in a pawn shop for around 7 years or so. We had people trying to pawn fake jewelry all the time. The best part was when they didn't know it was fake. So many women left yelling about, "That cheap son of a git." I can't even remember half the stupid crap we turned away. There was one thing that we didn't turn away and we should have, though. And I love this story. One of the other employees took in what he described as a 24K gold baby bracelet. It was a cock ring, a golden cock ring. This employee was a bit of a know-it-all, and he liked to rub other people's mistakes in their faces. He eventually went on to become manager and then district manager, and you can bet your ass I made sure that every employee under him knew about the baby bracelet. He never lived that down. Story 18. I worked in a jewelry store during the peak of the everybody buys gold and diamonds phase. A group of kids comes in with a ring they found in the parking lot. It's an obvious CZ, which I tell the ringleader, as soon as he hands it to me. One of the others demands, a touch annoyed, "How do you know?" In one of those excellent two rare moments of perfect reaction, I asked, "Why'd you bring it to me?" "Because you're a jeweler." Oh. Story 19. I may be late to this, but I worked at a pawn shop for about 6 years. I once had a customer walk up to the counter and slide a gold coin to me and say, "I think this is gold." Man, this particular customer reeked of bile and looked like he was high on everything possible. I looked at the coin and slid it back to him and replied, "I think it's a Chuck E. Cheese token. I can tell by the mouse on it." He just said, "Oh," and walked away. That was when I noticed he had crap his pants to the point it was almost all the way down his pant leg. Story 20. My mom owned the pawn shop in town, and she was a huge New Kids in the Block fan. Unfortunately, eBay decimated our business, and she couldn't afford to see their reunion concert. But her best friend from grade school could. She came in the next morning, wielding what she claimed was a condom full. You could be the mom of a new kid. She wanted $1,000 for the stuff, but my mom told her friend to stick it up her vajayjay. Story 21. As a worker in the ghetto, I get grills and gold teeth almost daily, straight from the mouth, and then they get mad when I can't accept it and throw a fit. Every employee wears panic buttons to call the cops immediately if something happens as well. Story 22. I mean, pretty much anything. People came in all the time thinking they could sell or pawn something for almost as much as they bought it new. Our policy was generally to buy for 25% of the new price, and only higher if it was an interesting or high-value item. I always hated jewelry because you just knew the person was going to get pissed at your low-ball offer. I paid $10K for this at the jeweler's, and here's the receipt and insurance certificate. Unfortunately, we go by the weight of the gold, which has a fluctuating market price, and the size and quality of the diamond. Going by our rates, I can't offer more than $200, and I can't blame them for feeling insulted. It sucks, because while some people pawn stuff to feed their substances habit, which sucks for them too, many of them do it because their power is going to be shut off, or they can't afford food for their kids, or their husbands. Medical bills are slowly creeping up and crap. I haven't worn this ring for years. Who cares if my grandmother gave it to me? It's got to be worth thousands. Or the 100 other reasons poverty damn blows. But you have to sit there and be stubborn, because you're poor too, and your damn crap-faced boss will deduct anything overpaid from your check. Pawn shops give you cool stories, but it crushes your soul. Story 23. Had a guy try selling me a gun. Before I could even nope him out of there, shop is in NJ, we do not buy guns, he began to point the gun around with people all over the store, pulling the trigger. That guy was a special kind of guy. Fortunately, the gun wasn't loaded, but still. Story 24. Pawn shop manager here. Been in the pawn business for about 7 years. I have seen just about everything, but I have this one customer who takes the cake. Guy comes in to pick up his pressure washer that he has already pawned several times. Signs that he has redeemed his item after checking it out and saying, "That's the one, have a great day." He then proceeds to walk out to his car with it, and then promptly storms back into the store with it proclaiming it isn't his. I calmly try to figure out what the problem is as he's going ballistic. Turns out the serial number was put in our system incorrectly, so I could not prove it was his. I went ahead and informed him a mistake was made on our side and I would replace it with a new one from Home Depot. Apparently that was not okay. He then called me a git several times over, as well as an idiot. Never been called that. Had to Google it. Ended up having to call the police on him to have him 86 ed from the premises. Turns out he is bipolar and doesn't take his meds. Recently, a young kid came in. He had a rare $1 coin. It was a US $1 coin with Ulysses Grant on it. He claimed his grandfather gave it to him at birth, and he had it over 10 years before he was born. He supposedly found it on the internet for over $100. I had to be the bad guy and tell him the coin wasn't even minted until after 2000, and it was still only valued at $1 in the current condition it was in. I also have this lady customer who comes in with jewelry and wants close to retail price. I struggle with her every time she comes in. One time, I offered her $15 for a piece she had, and she told me, "Well, you're just going to turn around and sell it for over 30. I replied, "That's how it works, otherwise I wouldn't be in business." Story 25. I work at a used bookstore and had a customer come in with very good condition DVDs, books, and CDs. Our old way of buying things used to be that we would judge every single object that came in based on condition and determine the price from there, usually around $1 if the book was in good condition. However, we now had a scanning system where we would scan a barcode and a price would be generated based on prices of it online, regardless of condition. Back to the customer. She's a scrawny old lady and looks pretty much like your stereotypical witch, but with a tank top and shorts. She comes into our store often and usually sells a few carts full of books and DVDs. With our old buyback system, her total would usually come out to around $70, a higher amount than most buybacks, and would sometimes throw a small fit if she didn't get enough. Now she comes in after we implement our new buyback system. She sells the usual cartfuls of books and DVDs in really good condition, but now her total came to around $17, and she flipped her crap. She asked, "Why do you have to use this piece of crap buyback system?" Started calling us random slurs and insults. She also knocks her books down and calls us racist. "Just because I'm white, you gotta be racist against me. Why do I have this treatment?" She demanded to talk to the manager, and he came. He told her that's just how it is now. You don't have to sell to us if you're not satisfied. He mentioned that the company had to change the system because we weren't buying books and stuff at an accurate price. Lady didn't want to take it and tried to shame us by telling everyone around her in the mall that we were racist against her and that she'll call the cops. She called the cops on us. But when they came, she instead got arrested for public disturbance and was subsequently banned from our store for some time. Story 26. I'm sure this will stay buried, but we combat a lot of people coming in with stupidly high asking prices by keeping an equivalent item in stock at a reasonable price. For example, the 1780 Austria Silver Thaler has Maria Theresa, if original, goes for a lot of money, but almost all of them are reproductions. The original dies were never destroyed and were used to make the reproductions. Therefore, they look exactly like the originals. One day, we had a father and son come in super excited. They finally hit the lotto. They showed me their Austria Thaler. I offered them a little bit shy of the silver content, which was $20 at the time, and the father got super pissed. He claimed we were trying to rip him off. That's understandable, I thought, because it was almost identical to the expensive version. So I tried to explain to him that there's hundreds of thousands of reproductions. He still didn't get it. His son did. So now his son and I tried to get him to come around and he wouldn't. That's when I went to the back room, pulled out a bucket with about 15 of the same type of thaler that he brought in and told him if he thought they were worth thousands of dollars, I'd sell mine to him for $22 each. He never flinched and said, "I'm not here to buy these, I'm here to sell mine." At that point, I just said we aren't buying those thalers anymore. Have a nice day. Story 27. I'm the local, I'll buy your crap guy. I resell stuff. I've been doing it since I was 13. Everyone tells me that I should just open up a pawn shop. About once a month, and especially since Pokemon Go has become popular, I have someone contact me about buying an ultra-rare Pokemon card worth like $2,000. No matter what, I bring the cash, and they show me the card, which is always a non-first edition Shadow Charizard in poor condition. Then I have to spend the next 45 minutes explaining to them why I won't buy their card and why it isn't worth $2,000. Also, I am extremely tired of explaining PSA grades to people. Another is the damn first appearance of Superman. What pisses me off the most is that it's a game of, are you more stupid than I am, from people who are trying to sell off their 1970s reprint of Action Comics. Number One, also known as the first app of Superman, have already discovered it's a reprint. Those people just want to see if I would pay anything for it. I can generally tell if something is stolen within the first 20 seconds of the conversation. I bought probably 100 bikes for $20 just to see if they were reported stolen by the police and to return them. As for dumbest, and not just ignorant, last year I had someone try very hard to sell me a very old antique statue of a Japanese sumo. He said he had it appraised to be worth $30,000. To be fair, it was very cool looking. It looked familiar. I peel away some stuff on the bottom and I see a date that is hard to read. I look it up and realize I'm looking at a child's well-made pottery project depicting Honda from Street Fighter. I legitimately wanted it for the story at this point and offered the guy $20 for it, which he declined because he knew what he had. Story 28. Pawn shops are not like that TV show. People don't bring in valuable antiques to be appraised. I would guess the most likely answer for real pawn shops is wedding rings that end up being fake. Story 29. When I worked at Guitar Center, we would have people come in to sell us used gear all the time, which was cool. Usually they didn't expect too much for it, unless it was actually something good or rare or vintage. But people would hear that vintage guitars are worth good money and think, I bet that Squire I got in 1997 that is all crusty and old is worth something, and get mad when we would offer them $35 for it and sell it for $70 because it was gross and somebody could buy a brand new one for $100 or $120 depending on if there was a sale on. My favorite was the one guy who came in with 2 garbage guitars. I think one of them might have been a bass that were missing strings and nuts and S. They weren't worth much even in good condition, but in the shape that they were in, it would cost more to get our in-house technician to repair them than he would get for them. Because we weren't in the business of buying broken instruments, we told him that if he wanted to sell them to us, he would have to have them repaired first. And I was completely upfront with him that the cost of the repairs would be more than we would pay him for the guitars. He decided to do it anyway and gave me a big stink about how he drove a half hour to come here to do this and took an hour and a half out of his day and how he felt like he should be compensated. When I called him the next day to tell him that the repairs were done and that we would be able to get him his money for the sale, he yelled at me over the phone for interrupting his golf game. Damn this guy. Story 30. I don't work at the pawn shop, but my friend does. People bring in dumb crap all the time to get a few dollars for substances. It starts from a candies box stolen from a shop next to the pawn shop to plungers, rubber ducks, electronics, real and fake jewelry they thought was real and ending on cars. Story 31. Babbage's, aka GameStop worker in the early 2000s. This was a case of the company being dumb. GameStop either owned or acquired FuncoLand and a couple other game store brands at the time, Babbage's being among them. We had a local guy that would drive about an hour each way and buy out every single copy of certain NES games and then bring them to our store. He would do the same in reverse as well. The company would then dutifully redistribute the games to equalize inventory between the stores. All told, he made close to $50K before they figured it out and disallowed transactions of 10 games or more in one visit. Last I heard, this same guy was churning, means manufactured spending, on gift cards, credit cards, etc., to the tune of 60-70K a year. Dude knows how to hustle. Story 32. Obligatory, not a pawn shop, but my father was a coin dealer, gold and silver broker, and every now and then I would work for him to make extra cash. Jewelry. Most people assume, because they paid a lot of money for jewelry, that it must be worth a lot intrinsically. Unfortunately, most jewelry has an intrinsic value much less than what you paid for it, especially if you bought it in a high-end jewelry store. I realize that may not necessarily be dumb, but a lot of people come in with jewelry that they paid $5,000 for, and for some reason, and 2 years later they think it's worth $10,000. Coins. Many people assume because a coin is old that it must be worth a lot of money. Also, it's really amazing how many people think they have rare coins. A really common one was, a lot of people claim to have a 1943 copper penny, even after having it explained that they are incredibly rare and basically nobody has one. I understand that a lot of people have a 1943 penny and don't understand that it's not the copper one, but a lot of people will actually say, no, I understand that, but I actually have one of the copper ones. And of course, they never do. I also realized that having a coin that you think is worth a lot of money is not dumb necessarily. But the dumb part comes in when you explain to the person, no, a 1945 quarter that he found in your pocket is not worth $500 or $1,000, and then they still try to argue with you. Story 33. Not a pawn shop worker, but I was in one with a friend of mine when a man who looked to have enjoyed more than just a few crack rocks in his day came inside with a sink. A sink that he apparently just ripped out of a hotel or kitchen of an abandoned house or something, and I do mean ripped out. No idea what he thought he would get for it, but the guy behind the counter told him in no uncertain terms that he needed to leave and take his sink with him. It was damn hilar edit. It was pretty hilar, you just had to be there. Story 34. I just have to say, I've only tried to sell something to a pawn shop once. Some kind of CB radio setup and related components, and they offered me $20. When I told them that wasn't enough, they laughed at me and said I wouldn't get a better offer anywhere else. I ended up selling it on Craigslist for $300. Story 35. I literally just had a lady walk out on me angry that I couldn't offer any money on her small wooden spice rack. It even had half-empty spices still on it. A few months ago, an old man came in with a trash bag full of used bongs, complete with WE'd and dripping with bong water. Said he's selling all his son's stuff. He was such a sweet old dude, I felt bad and told him to break it all up in the dumpster outside and not ride around with it. I get a ton of old coins that people bring in thinking they're worth a bunch of money, and I usually have even older stuff in my change drawer that I can show them. Most people laugh about it. Also, I have seen quite a few gently used sex toys in my time as well. Story 36. Worked at a comic book and memorabilia store, and people have really messed up notions of value. Just because it is old doesn't mean it is valuable. Just because it is rare doesn't mean there is a market for it. The worst was when people would come in with things that were signed with no authentication and demand outrageous prices. Some old lady and her obviously tweaker granddaughter brought in a comic they claimed was signed by Stan Lee and wanted $1,000 for it. We laughed them out of the shop. Also, a picture of you with William Shatner that he signed has no value to anyone but you. Story 37. I went to college in a farm town in northern Colorado. I had a red leather jacket that I bought in high school that I wanted to sell in one of the pawn shops out there. I never wore it and would rather have cash than the jacket. I didn't want money for substances, just money because I was a broke college student. They refused to buy it because it was red, and that color was somehow gang-related. I had no idea that Farmtown had any gang problems, but whatever. Story 38. I'm not a pawn shop owner, but when I was 10 or 11, I caught a black widow spider and excitedly brought it to the pawn shop in town inside a Mountain Dew bottle, ready to claim my bounty. They weren't interested. Pet shop wouldn't take it either. I made a cardboard sign and stood on the side of the road, but I never found a buyer. Story 39. I worked at Clothes Mentor, like GameStop, but for high-end women's clothing and accessories. Sellers were almost always women in their late 20s to early 40s. Two younger guys, prob late teens, come in one day with a Louis Vuitton bag. I could tell from the minute they walked in that it was fake, but I humored them. Bro 1 looks at Bro 2, smiles, and smugly puts the bag on the counter and asks how much he can get for it. I politely tell Bro 1 we can't take it because it's not authentic. He knows the jig is up, but tries to play cool and says, "What are you talking about? This is real." I disagreed and began listing off the various specific reasons why it wasn't real. I asked him where he got it. He says, "I bought it for $250 at Macy's at the mall over there." Not so much. The mall over there has a Macy's, but that Macy's has never, ever carried LV. Also, the authentic version of the bag he brought in retailed for over $800 at the time, 6 years ago. Story 40. Kind of the opposite, but in the mid-'80s, I worked for a guy that ran food trailers that went to different festivals, etc. It was a blast of a summer job. But anyway, kids would dig around the house to find money to blow at the arcades and for food, rides, etc. Many of these kids would get into the coin collection, seeing a 10 or 20, but not realizing they were silver certificates, silver quarters daily, Indian head pennies, even had a guy pay for his drink with a roll of Buffalo nickels. Story 41. My uncle works for one. He manages the firearms counter at his shop. From what I understand, it's pretty large, has been trying to get me to visit him for years, but I've never checked the place out. He was telling me about a crazy one he got a few years ago. Guy brought in a Vietnam-era collapsible tube-style rocket launcher with live ammunition. Obviously, my uncle had to report it. He has to report all weapons he takes in with the ATF with his state's laws. This was no exception. The police promptly showed up to confiscate it. If I remember right, guy served and brought it home as a souvenir and decided to sell it for a few bucks. Story 42. I used to work at a pawn shop in Los Angeles. One time this guy brought in $102 bills, non-consecutive, and wanted a loan of $120. My boss told me to do the loan, so I followed instruction and gave the guy $120. The guy then managed to not come back for the bills, so we made an $80 profit from sheer stupidity. Story 43. A month ago, man stole a lawnmower from the front of our store. Well, just 2 days ago, he returned to the shop with the exact same lawnmower, claiming it was his. He tried to sell it to us. Not only did the serial number on that mower match the one we had, but it still had our price tag on the handle. Story 44. Worked at an auction house rather than a pawn shop, but it's the same principle. I once had to deal with a woman who brought in a badly damaged, chipped, dog child chewed, simple pine bookcase. She informed me that she had paid $200 for the bookcase 10 years ago and that due to its appreciating value, she expected to receive at least $1,000 for it now. She was very put out when I suggested the most she was going to get was $20, and only if someone wanted it for their shed. Story 45. I never expected to strike it rich, but last summer I found a cool-looking guitar that my hoarder neighbor's family threw away after she died. A few weeks later, I took it to a pawn shop since the owner was really into guitars and would buy old guitars for a decent price, and I wanted to take my sister out to dinner with it for her birthday. It turns out that literal piece of garbage was a model that was pretty popular with folk singers in the 60s. I ended up $200 richer, so I took my sister for a nice meal and bought myself some tennis courts. Story 46. 10 Irish ex been running a pawn shop. Fake Rolex watches. Family heirlooms, parking lot buys that turned out to be fake were the normal. Weirdest thing I've loaned on would be dentures. I'd give the guy 10, 20. I was asked why I took them, and my response was always the same. If that ducker wants to eat solid food again, he'll come get them. He always came and redeemed them. Story 47. I have never worked at a pawn shop. I was once in a bad place, though, and had an interview at one. During the interview, a guy came in with a 12-2X4, like a big piece of wood. Legitimately tried getting $20 for it. He couldn't get it all the way through the door, and the guy interviewing me, we were standing behind the counter, stopped mid-sentence to tell him to duck off. I thanked him very much and have never worked in a pawn shop. Story 48. I manage a pawn shop/trading post in New Jersey and could tell you hundreds of stories related to this, but the dumbest thing I've had someone bring in was a used lifelike sex doll. It was something that you pay somewhere around $3,000 to $5,000 for. He was just completely flabbergasted that we would not buy it. Story 49. 1. The previous owner of our shop was burgled and called us to tell us to look out for a load of gold sovereign coins with very distinctive dates. 30 minutes later, the substances ducked. Retards came in to try to sell them. Now in prison. 2. An iron bar to rob me of the money in the till with. I had a sword behind the counter. Just been sentenced, but only to home detention. Go figure. Story 50. My fiance works at a small-time retro gaming store and tells me stories all the time about getting people in and wanting to sell their copies of Madden 2006 for $30 because they saw it on eBay for that much. Probably once or twice a week she'll get a really cool item, but mostly it's trash that people dump off for their substances habit. Story 51. Musical instruments. Sorry, your student flute from 1970 is tarnished and dented, not to mention that the cost of replacing the pads and corks will be more than buying a brand new student flute. Keep it for the memories. They're worth more than your crappy flute. Story 52. They had a guy bring in a portable toilet to sell. I watched him get off the bus in front of my shop and walk with it, and looked at my coworker like, check this dumbass out. Then he headed for the door, and I ran out to tell him we don't deal in fecal matter. Also, silver was a giant pain in my ass that people thought they were going to get a ton of money for their 3 grams. Story 53. My parents would used to watch the Chinese Antique Roadshow, where people that deemed themselves as experts would bring in supposedly rare antique porcelain. The expert would give a little presentation about the porcelain, and then, if it was deemed fake by 3 actual experts, the host would smash it with a golden hammer. It was funny to see some smashed dreams. Story 54. Managed a pawn shop in Michigan that was not American Jewelry and Loan, and these were the highlights. Someone brought in brass paper clips trying to convince me they were gold, what was clearly the top of a TV tray, trying to be passed off as an antique painting, and my personal favorite, teeth, because they were around a gold tooth. Story 55. I've been working at a pawn shop for about 9 years, so there are countless ones. But a favorite was a girl brought me a solid gold 24K ring to sell, and it was a plastic louder ring from a board game. Tons of others, but that one is one of the best ones that wasn't a sad story. Story 56. Can't verify if this is true or not, but I remember my grandpa recently talking about some guys who robbed a house and decided to pawn off the spoils. The only problem was that the stuff they stole was actually from the pawn shop owner's house, who then called the cops on them. Story 57. Then there are the Git Pawn Shop employees, or smart depending on your perspective. I regularly see used Crap Harbor freight tools marked up higher than new. Just last week I saw a 129.99 central pneumatic air compressor they were trying to sell at $200. Story 58. I worked at a GameStop in college and someone asked if we traded for cash. I told him yes, and he brought out a calculator, an NES light gun without a cable, and a rock, and asked what he could get for them. Tweakers, man. Story 59. I run a video game store, and several people weekly bring armloads of old Madden, NBA, and other sports games and thinking they're going to get all kinds of cash. They're very upset when I give them $5 out of pity. Story 60. Not me personally, but when I was 15, there was a kid in my class who claimed he was going to be rich because he was going to pawn his mom's stolen credit card. Story 61. I used to work at an LGS, primarily Magic. If I had a penny for every time a kid had me look through his 3-inch binder of recently rotated standard commons, I could play vintage. Pawn shop owners. What was the most illegal thing a customer had brought to your shop? Story 1. Employee not owner. A guy brought in a stack of like 15 laptops that all said property of City Public School right on the top of each one. He then threatened to shoot me when I told him to get out. Yes, I am aware that schools, businesses, etc. sometimes sell off old laptops, which is why I don't flat out call the cops whenever somebody brings in a suspected stolen item. There's always the chance that no matter how obviously stolen it is, the person owns it legit. However, I'm not going to risk my job or my conscience by taking in an item if it has a label on it claiming it's somebody else's property. Also, how am I supposed to sell a laptop that says property of City Public Schools on it? Pawn shops have a bad enough rap as it is. Story 2. A guy literally brought in an RPG. He was doing yard work for this old lady whose husband had passed. She gave it to him for doing some yard work, not realizing it was live and active. The guy was career military, and after the bomb squad came and disabled it, they went to her house and found a trove of similarly very illegal military-grade weapons. Story 3. Not an owner, but I got a call from a pawn shop saying that one of my at-home employees tried to sell her work computer. It has my company's logo and contact info right on it, plain as day. How stupid can some people be? Story 4. So I'm not an owner, and I wouldn't call this illegal per se, but I feel like I have to share this. A friend of mine owns a pawn shop, and one day a dude walks in with a cardboard box filled to the top with his own crap. He claims that it's magic, and my friend cuts him off right there and kicks him out. As he's walking out, he drops the box on accident, gets all of his crap on the floor, sees the mess he's made, stares at the horrid pile of crap for a couple of seconds, and runs out of the shop. My friend never got his name and never saw him again. The smell would proceed to linger in the shop for a good month after it was cleaned up. Story 5. Buddy of mine worked at a pawn shop for a few years. They had a guy try to sell them a police walkie-talkie, like straight stolen from a car, but with the battery taken out. They told him to get out and called the cops. I believe they picked the guy up a few hours later. Story 6. Just a worker here, but we had a couple come in to pawn their back escort over the weekend, happens a lot, and brought their bill of sale. They wanted a simple $1K loan, which wasn't bad considering how much it was worth. No more than 30 minutes later, cops are there with the owner. Apparently, they worked for him and went and pawned all of his industrial equipment. Story 7. Worked at a gun shop, and a shady-looking guy brought in a few pairs of night vision googles, like high-end military-grade PVS. 14 night vision googles. Asked him why he was selling them. Oh, I just don't need them anymore. Cool, man. Do you mind if I call the company real quick and run the numbers? Sometimes this stuff is stolen property. And as soon as I said that, he jumped across the counter, grabbed the googles, and bolted for the door. Story 8. A friend of mine owns a rather unique store, not a pawn shop, but he sells a lot of authentic medieval weaponry, armor, clothing, and similar. While I was there, a young couple decided his shop was the place to sell a few old SS daggers, belts, flags, and other Nazi memorabilia. Solid logic, except for one thing. We are in Germany. Here the state kind of frowns upon owning or selling this kind of stuff. They could have donated it to any museum and would have had no issue with the law whatsoever. I mean, it was not their fault they found it, right? But they figured that if Grandpa was a Nazi, he could at least help with the funds for the renovations, and decided cash was better than being named in a museum leaflet. My friend was mostly insulted by the idea that just because he owns a medieval store and sells historic weapons, he must know a Nazi collector that would pay cash. But that was the end of it. He told them to get out and donate it, or if they insist on selling it, to ship it to the US. More money from history buffs, or at least not one happy little German Nazi with a new happy stabby toy. Story 9. This just reminded me of my friend who pawned the DSLR camera I let him borrow for a school project. I asked for it back a good amount of times, and not once did he tell me what he did. I had to hear it from someone else, and then he claimed that I gave it to him. Story 10. An MP40. Not actually me, but my significant other. He manages a store owned by a national chain, brought in on pawn, and as with all neat things, he was just waiting for the loan to drop. After 30 days of non-payment, item goes out for sale. At this point, he could purchase it. Now, I'm not a huge gun historian, but I know the era and style and had to ask, that gun is super rare if it's not full auto. When a gun is taken in on loan, the gun is run, not the person. So our state's Bureau of Investigation was notified of its existence. Not only is a federal stamp for automatic weapon expensive AF, It's also difficult to obtain, so he was no longer going to purchase it. And it's a good thing because shortly after the gun was seized by ATF, which is when we found out the actual worth, $10,000, $20,000. Original owner brought it back as a war trophy. Son is the one who got a loan for like $200, but it was never registered, so it was contraband. Story 11. I had this guitar that had a lil sliding door on the side, meant to hold picks. I put weed in there as a joke. Completely forgot about it as I was selling it. They were chill. Story 12. Not a pawn shop owner, but was in the pawn shop when this happened. Someone brought in a wheelchair with the tag for the local hospital on the back. Example, property of somewhere hospital. The pawn shop owner told them to leave it and get out. They did, and he called the non-emergency line. The police came and picked it up and took it back to the hospital, or that's what they said they were doing. Story 13. In a similar vein, my friend found some weed in the oven he bought from a used appliance store. The shop called him to ask about the oven. Luckily, he didn't give out his address. Story 14. Literally had a customer come in and say, "Hi, I've just stolen this phone off my sister. How much will you give me for it?" Also had a customer bring in 5 MacBooks at the same time with a certain logo on it which gave me the impression they were stolen. Told him to leave them with me for testing and called the police. Had another customer bring in a gun and a crossbow. That was weird. I'm in the UK. This is not a normal thing. Story 15. You always gotta look out for the people bringing in a crap ton of brand spanking new tools or electronics. Over time, you learn to read people based on their appearance, behavior, and personal information. An experienced pawnbroker can almost always immediately sleuth out whether they're stolen or not. In these cases, they usually are. I've never had someone intentionally bring in illicit items, but it's important to check pockets and compartments on cases and similar things. It's not unheard of for some eclectic customer to forget about a lil baggie of weed they'd stashed. One guy paid off his loan with cash, and there was a thin layer of white residue coating it. First time I'd seen that one. Not illegal, but toward the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, some wisecrack nutcase did try to sell us disinfectant. Funny, but also annoying. Story 16. Not a pawn shop employee or owner, but I bought an iPod Classic from a pawn shop, and it had some of Hitler's speeches and Nazi music on it. I don't know if that's illegal to have Hitler's speeches, but it's certainly very controversial, especially since I've bought it in Germany, in a region that was always a point of conflict between France and Germany. I don't know if the iPod's contents were specifically illegal. However, I would imagine that at least some of the music that was on it was, as it was not historical music, but modern, sort of crappy metal music, like Bose Onkels and some other bands, whose music I most certainly won't listen to. The region where I bought it is called Breisgau, and it's in the south of Germany next to France and Switzerland, which very roughly translates to where 3 countries meet. Part of the history of the Alsace, l'Alsace, das Elsass, and Germany is that basically Germany and France had been constantly at war to keep or gain the region, so that the people there, to this day, speak German and French because of the constant change in official languages. So having these sentiments is bad and not appropriate, especially at this region. Story 17. Not a pawn shop owner, but I was on the receiving end of someone selling my stolen stuff at one. We had our house burgled in UK. Me and my dad went to some pawn shops to give them a list of everything taken. Whilst we were in there, someone comes up to the counter and starts unloading a bunch of stuff they want to pawn. It was our stuff. We got in a major incident inside the shop. The a-hole manager of cash converters was saying it's nothing to do with me. Take it all outside the shop. Sorry, buddy, but when you're happy to buy a camera full of someone else's family photos, a laptop, and a bunch of other electronics from 2 addicts who look like they're homeless, no teeth, obvious signs of drug abuse, etc., then it's absolutely 100% your problem to deal with. Police called. Addicts charged with handling stolen goods. I got charged with assault. That was later dropped. Nobody charged with the actual burglary, so no real punishments for anyone involved. Story 18. Not illegal and not a pawn shop owner, but when my first fiancée and I parted ways, I went to go sell my ring. She had given me her ring back, so I went to pawn them because I was broke and I got so many dirty looks for selling an engagement ring. I think they thought I stole it despite what I told them, but them's the breaks, I suppose. Story 19, a story from the 90 AES. My Fender Stratocaster was stolen and I reported it. A couple years passed and an officer called me. Off, your guitar serial number showed up at a pawn shop. Me, great. So, you know who stole it? Off, the guy who sold it to pawn shop said it was a present from his girlfriend, but she died. Me, okay, so I get my guitar back? Off, no, the pawn shop already sold it. Me, don't they have to check serial numbers? Off, yeah, but that can take 30 days and we can't expect them to hold on to this stuff forever. Me, what? So what do I do now? Off, nothing really. Me, so why are you calling me? Off, just thought you would want to know. Bye. Source, my true story. Most stuff isn't even worth the time to report it stolen. Story 20? A TV was stolen from my dad's office and sold to a pawn shop. Pawn America, La Crosse, EY. This had been happening with yard decorations, and our neighbors told us what pawn shop to look at. Sure enough, it showed up, and at first the manager would not provide any info, or even cared that we thought it was stolen. My dad then offered to buy it and requested that the TV be plugged in to check for defects. It worked just fine, and my dad said he will take it, but then pulled the remote out his pocket that the thief didn't take, and turned the TV off, proving it was his. The manager then had to call and report this. Turns out accepting a TV without a remote is a red flag that he missed in this case. The manager quit, but the general belief was he knew most of the stuff he was selling was stolen, but he fudged paperwork to keep the thief's identity a secret. My dad put him in his place and humiliated him in the most simple way for being a lying idiot. Story 21. Friend of mine owns a shop. One day a woman walks in and asks if there was a female employee she could talk to. No problem. It's a family shop, and his 18-year-old daughter comes out to help her. She asks to go out to her car, where she opens the trunk. Whole thing is packed with sex toys, bondage crap, outfits, and a big box of sex toys. Woman says her sister, who recently passed away, sold this stuff at parties and she had no idea what to do with it. Story 22. Not a pawn shop owner or employee, but a block away from my high school was a pawn shop. It was announced that everyone in the entire school was going to get a Chromebook to do schoolwork. On the first day that we got the Chromebook, it was rumored that multiple people had brought them to the pawn shop to make a quick buck. I asked one of my teachers who was in charge of all the Chromebook repairs about this later, and he said that only one student had actually done it that he knew of, and he had used the money to buy some substances. Story 23. Not an owner and not illegal, but one of the guys who worked at the place told me that someone brought in a damn box, a decent-sized box that has a switch on it that turns on a motor inside that has a connection to a sex toy included. Story 24. My time to shine. My house was broken into years back. They stole very particular items. My mom's laptop, which was hidden under the couch, our great-grandmother's jewelry and such. My laptop, Wacom pen tablet, and iPad were all sitting on the kitchen table. The only thing they took was my iPad and the pen to my Wacom tablet. They left my laptop and the Wacom pen tablet. Remember these points for later. The cops couldn't find any good prints to run through the database, and no one was immediately found as a suspect. Fast forward a few months, my brother, who manages one of the biggest pawn shops in our city, calls me to tell me that some guy just tried to pawn my iPad. The dude hands the iPad to my brother. Brother turns it on, and the home screen is set to a picture of me and my nephew. Brother tells dude that he has to take it to the back and check the serial numbers after getting the guy's driver's license. Brother calls cops and then comes back out to tell guy he has to keep the iPad because it's stolen property. Dude books it out of there, but he wasn't very bright. My brother has all of his personal information. The cops did an investigation and come to find out this dude is the head of a large theft ring. His cronies steal things. They have to give him the stolen goods. Then he gives them the substances. Well, a few more months go by and we find out that our mom's best friend's boyfriend was the guy who had put the hit on our house. He had an oxy problem due to a bad back surgery and a dealing doctor. When the doc cut the supply, he turned to other means. It wasn't him that broke in or stole our stuff, however. He knew I used my computer for my job and made sure they left my laptop and stole my mom's. He and his boss, along with multiple other addicts, career thieves, were brought down by my iPad. The cops said they had broken into an estimated 300-plus homes and had stolen millions of dollars in property. Story 25. I used to work at a paw store. A shady guy brought in a tiger skull. I don't remember if it was illegal or not, but the owner was yelling at him. He kept coming back brining animal skin and skulls. I think the police drug busted his house, from what the owner told me. Story 26. Okay, I'm not a pawn shop owner, but I know a few. One thing I've seen was a guy who brought in smoke grenades and M249 saw belts that he had stolen from our local military drill center. Another was a guy at a local gun store who brought in a pistol that had an illegal oil filter suppressor on it. They told the guy, get the duck out and go destroy that thing. Story 27. Someone tried to sell a rifle. In damn England. He claimed that it was an air pistol, which is allowed if you keep it locked in a box and have a proper gun license. But we could clearly tell that it was a rifle. Idiot got arrested and landed his butt in prison. Story 28. Really nice old-looking farmer man walks in with a shotgun with a barrel way too short. Long story short, boss bought it off of him and immediately called the local PD to tell them. Cop asked if you could just remove the barrel and dispose of it as it was too much paperwork and hassle to come down and get it. Local PD are a damn joke. Story 29. I'm not an owner, but I once saw someone try to sell a vintage 1940s concealed firearm to the pawn shop. This was illegal as heck, and the owner had to turn him down. Story 30. I don't like pawn shops. My buddy had his surfboard stolen. A few weeks later, he found his board in a pawn shop. My buddy approached the staff and said it was his, and it had been stolen. The staff then told him he had to buy the board if he wanted it back. The police were called because the board was reported stolen. Upon the arrival of the police, my buddy learned that he still had to buy the board if he wanted it back, and then file a claim with the state to get his money back. Why does the state cover pawn shops selling stolen goods? Story 31. Not a pawn shop, but I've once had a younger man bring an R he claimed to have built to my gunstone. He wanted to trade it in for a Ruger R556. I gave the rifle a glance over, mostly trying to figure out what the scope would be worth. I quickly noticed it had no serial number, which is entirely illegal. Made up some crap about not taking consumer-built Rs on trade and took down his name and address, and then notified the sheriff's office. Story 32. Former gun shop employee here. When I was the new kid, someone tried to pawn a machine gun. Not like, oh, this is a rifle that has select fire capability. This kid brought in a 1919 belt-fed machine gun, the kind they mount inside WW2 tanks to shoot at Germans. Felt like out of Street Kings when Keanu opens the trunk and shows the Korean dude's AM2 heavy machine gun. At first, I thought it was a prank from my new coworkers, a mock-up, or a semi-auto only. Guy was asking for full cash out, no paperwork. As soon as I pulled the bolt back, it was very apparent this gun is not a normal semi-automatic. Red flag 2, held the kid at the counter while a colleague dialed the police. Told the dude we could cut him a check, or he could wait for my boss to come down and cash him out. Police came and took him away. I'm purposefully eliminating a lot of details because the case happened in a pretty small town. The kid was a gangster wannabe and stole the gun. He thought that the gun shop could be used to fence it because it's collectible, and the rednecks there wouldn't let it go to the feds. Story 33. Employee here, not an owner. But I don't know if it's necessarily illegal, but one time, a guy brought me a handful of human teeth and gold filings. He wanted me to extract the gold. I said, no thanks, bro. Story 34. I was the victim. Here had a helmet stolen off my motorcycle outside a friend's house. This helmet was almost $1,000, and I literally turned my back for a minute. Some kid came in the gate, snatched my helmet, and ran off. 2 days later, after filing a stolen item notification report with 3 big pawn shops in my area, I got a call that they had my Siscorti helmet. I went to get it, and the lady from the shop was waiting with an officer. She said, as soon as the kid was told to wait, that it matched the description of a stolen item, the kid bolted. He left his ID on the counter along with my helmet. 3 months later, I got a summons for court and find out the 20-year-old kid had substances on school property probation and possession of a firearm underage, along with a few others. He got hit with grand larceny over my helmet, and through our court site, I found out he got 3 years in prison for larceny and probation violation. I felt it was excessive, but play stupid games. Win stupid prizes went awesome here. Story 35. My dad's friend works at a pawn shop in a crappy area and has had some crazy crap come in. Mostly stolen guns and tools, but the story he likes to tell is when a homeless guy tried to sell a sawed-off shotgun covered in tape. They called the cops, and the guy tells them he found it in the park. Story 36. Employee, not an owner. Not really illegal in itself, but probably the most contact with law enforcement I've had. I live in the UK where we have to put the serial numbers of any technology through a police check before paying the customer. We put it in, and it flagged as wanted by the police. Within 10 minutes, the police were there and asking us to hand the phone over and to talk to the guy. We hadn't even gotten through to them yet on the phone. From what I understand, the guy has bought it online a few months back. Unfortunately for him, the phone was wanted in connection to a murder. The look on that poor guy's face. Story 37. Former employee, I've seen quite a few sawed-off shotguns and short-barreled rifles. Someone even brought in a machine gun, Valmet M76, and not a one was registered. And this is all in rural Georgia. Scary to think what some people can get a hold of. Story 38. Not an owner, but a customer. I saw a dude next to me bring in like 3 assault rifles with the ammo and around 10 grenades, ready to use. Not sure if it was illegal or not, but it made my antique Hot Wheels collection look like crap. Story 39. Not a pawn shop, but someone brought in 100+ stolen brass flower urn to a local scrapyard. The flower urns fit into a grave marker and flip over and fit into a hole in the top of a grave marker when not in use. Some a-hole thought he would get away with stealing as many as he could get in a single load. He brought it to the scrapyard, and an employee told him he had to leave the urns because his boss would have to approve the purchase first. The scrapyard calls the police after the guy left, and he had left a fake phone number and never came back. I guess he figured the gig was up and bailed. The flower urns typically cost $300 a piece to replace. I think they found the cemetery they were stolen from and returned. Story 40. I used to work in a pawn shop that was just for tools. This guy brought in these really nice top-of-the-line wrenches to sell. He said business was booming, and I asked what he did, and he said, "You really want to know?" In a scared kind of way. I was like, "Yeah, I'm just making small talk." He said he was a dealer, so I said I don't want the wrenches. They were probably stolen. Story 41. Former employee. The most illegal thing brought to my shop was an 8-ball Coke. He wasn't selling it, but wanted to buy a digital scale and brought it to test the scales we had. Aside from that, a chainsaw. Although not illegal itself, they used it to threaten me, which was pretty illegal. Pawn shops in a big metro get pretty crazy. Story 42. I used to work in an electronics/DVDs/games secondhand store. We used to get people in all the time selling what were blatantly mass-run bootlegs. Hundreds of copies of the same DVD, which under even rudimentary inspection, did not come off a proper print run. Crap, if you popped one in a player, it usually just cut right into the movie a few seconds in or some crap. And people who'd just stolen crap from a first-hand retailer nearby and were busy tearing the packaging off in the damn queue for the registers. Story 43? So I worked at a pawn shop several years ago. A dude brought in a box of random crap. One of the dumb workers we had bought said box of crap. We found the lock with part of the door in the box when we started to price it out. It was clearly the door and lock he'd kicked in to steal said crap. I ducking cried laughing for the entire day over that. Story 44. Employee, not owner. Get odd stuff every now and then? The most recent thing was a hand crossbow, which are illegal in Canada. Also had various paraphernalia. Used crack pipes, powder, etc. Had a customer pawn a laptop once, then come back in a little while later asking if they could get the weed out of their bag. Weed was legal here at this time, but still funny. Not illegal in Canada, but we've had Nazi gold come through too. Story 45. One of my friends in high school somehow managed to steal several laptops from cash converters. Got away with it too. That was until they tried to sell one of the laptops. They stole back to cash converters the very next week, with the CC sticker and barcode still on the bottom. He was quickly caught and they found his whole stash, and he did 100 hours community service. Story 46. Not a pawn shop worker or anything, but my friend bought a push bike from a pawn shop which needed a bit of work, which we did, and subsequently found that it had previously been stolen most likely. Serial numbers removed, etc. Few weeks later, he'd been done some shopping and it had been pinched from outside the shops on the same street where he bought it. You'll never guess where it showed up. Story 47. Not a pawn shop, nor am I affiliated in any way, but this made the newspaper. Someone bought a jacket at a thrift store for their kid and found an 8-ball of powder in the pocket. Later that week, someone bought a toy for their kids from Zellers, which as it turns out had previously been returned, and there was an ounce of weed in the box. Story 48. Not an owner, but my friend who works at a pawn shop told me this. One day, someone came in with a toxic waste container, like an aluminium, real deal nuclear waste container. They had to call Homeland Security. Story 49. I live near an airbase. Someone about to get kicked out sold his radio equipment, and a local drunk bought it from the local pawn shop. Turned out a bunch of classified channels were programmed, and the drunk was talking to pilots. The FBI showed up over that one and confiscated everything. Story 50. I was talking to a guy. He went to sell a shotgun, and the person at the counter didn't know how to measure barrel length, so thinking it was an illegal short-barreled shotgun, she tried to call the cops on him.